This is the Kentucky Council School Board Attorney Summer 2010 presentation on current awareness and practice resources on the web for the school law attorney. I'm Justin Bathen. I'm with the University of Kentucky in the Department of Educational Leadership Studies. So let's get going. I have one big change I want to talk to you about today, two resulting questions. I want to provide you lots of examples. And I'm going to leave with one consideration that should lead us into our discussion here today. So first, the big change, and I want to start with an observation, and more specifically, I want to start with a story. This story involves a couple of friends of mine, and it involves this video. Alright, it's called Did You Know 2.0? It's a video about globalization and what it means for us in America, and specifically what it means for our education system. What's important about this video is not the content of the video, although it is fantastic, and I recommend that you go check it out. What's important for my purposes today is this number, 4,100,000 views. And this was a little while ago, actually. And actually, you notice that this is Did You Know 2.0. There's also version 1.0, 3.0, 4.0, and a ton of other versions, all of which collectively add up to over 30 million plus YouTube hits. Okay, so with that in mind, let me tell you the story of how Did You Know 2.0 and all the Did You Know series came about. Here's a friend of mine, a guy named Carl Fish. He was born here in Lexington, but now lives around Denver, Colorado. Carl is a technology resource teacher there and is in charge of technology for his district. And one day was asked to give a professional development for his teachers where he put together a bunch of statistics about globalization and how it's changing the world and how his schools there in Denver, Colorado need to adjust. Alright, most importantly though, Carl put this presentation on his blog. And on his blog, it was viewed by this guy, Scott McLeod, also a friend of mine, a professor at Iowa State University, who viewed the content on his blog, thought it was some really neat content, and decided that it would work really well in a video. And so together they put the first edition of Did You Know 1.0 together. It got a bunch of hits. They thought it was interesting. They thought they should spruce it up a bit. And so along came version 2.0 that was assisted by a graphic design company. And then 3.0 and 4.0 and on we go. Alright, so what's interesting here is that after these fellows made their video, copies started to turn up, like exact copies. So here's one by Amy Beth Hale, who just took the exact copy and also put it up on YouTube, and it too got hundreds of thousands of hits. Other things started to happen, though, even more interesting. It started to be remixed. So there was a remix, for instance, for the presidential inauguration, the presidential race of 2008. Okay, so that's the inaugural edition there for President Obama, with the Did You Know concept being remixed. Then there were comedy remixes, right? So once this thing became quite popular, then people started to make fun of it online with other videos. Other countries jumped on board. For instance, here's the UK edition. Then corporations found this thing to be interesting, and so Sony BMG wanted a version made for one of their meetings, and finally, Did You Know 4.0 was a version commissioned by The Economist magazine about media and how it's changing in the world. Anyway, quite interesting, right? And so what's happening here? Remember, what we have here is just a teacher and a professor. Regular, ordinary folks, for the most part. These are not your traditional voices. These voices are new. So that's the end of my story. Now let me move on and tell you a bit about what I see as a big change, and that's the information revolution that we're currently in. To understand the revolution, though, I have to tell you the story I tell lots of folks, and that's the story of an awesome technology that we refer to as paper. Right? So paper used to look like that. Before that, we did it on animal skins, and before that, we wrote on cave walls. What's interesting is not all of the different what we're writing. What's interesting to me today is the technology on which we're writing. So here we're writing on cave walls, but in and of itself, it's a revolutionary technology because it's preserving human thought over time in a location apart from our own physical bodies. Right? You see, it's quite revolutionary to store information in this way. Okay, and then when we made that information storage device mobile on animal skins, that too was revolutionary. The production cost was quite high. You had to kill something to get the technology, but nevertheless, it was revolutionary. When we lowered that production cost substantially by moving to wood-based products instead, that too was revolutionary. It enabled lots more information to be written down and shared. Finally, when Gutenberg invented the printing press, or the single character printing press, that too was revolutionary because what it did was it took the concept of paper and allowed the distribution of that concept to reach entirely new heights unfathomable before. And so that technology, this printing press technology, is a technology that has dominated our world for the past couple hundred years. And in fact, we've built enormous monuments to this technology. Here's the Library of Congress, right? Libraries are a place for storing information that has been written down and copied with the printing press technology. Now, of course, things are changing. We don't need the paper anymore, and that is revolutionary. When you lose the paper, or you lose that physical medium and you transcribe that information into ones and zeros, those ones and zeros can be sent lots and lots of places instantaneously. In fact, there's lots of ones and zeros that are potentially floating above our heads right now because we're in a wireless network. Right? So that revolution is the revolution we're currently facing. We won't know what that means for many years, but it is going to have an effect on all aspects of life in the same way that lowering the production cost of paper did with the printing press. So we're going to produce a lot of information. We're going to produce something like 70 exabytes of information this year, which is something like 70 billion gigabytes. That is a lot of information. It's actually larger than the Library of Congress, all the information contained in it. It's actually a lot larger, something like 518,000 times the Library of Congress. So all that information that's being created digitally, that's being beamed down from satellites, that's being created with digital photos and videos, all of that, 0.01% of it, is going to be replicated on paper. Alright, so this is a big deal. Information is no longer contained with physical space. There are no more walls. So what happens when there's no more walls? Well, interesting things. Stuff like this, which is just a bunch of walls that are containing pieces of paper that contain information, we don't need that anymore. Turns out a little search is just as effective, or, quite more effective. Other media, such as video, we needed the film before. Now, of course, we don't. Even when we were doing things in a digital fashion with ones and zeros, attempting, we still needed the wires. Even when we approved on it, it looked something like this. Notice the wires. But now, of course, we don't need the wires anymore. Maps changed. They look like this. Encyclopedias changed. They look like this. And so on. In all of these different companies, we see a change in the fundamental technology of information on each different aspect. So on Amazon, it's the information related to price and sales. On Expedia, it's related to flights, eHarmony, Love, Craigslist, local buyers and sellers, Flickr, photos, on and on. This is what's happening. The information is changing. All the ordinary people now have a much larger voice because they can tap into all this information, and more importantly, they can produce their own information and share it. So that helps to explain why this guy, a teacher in Colorado and a professor in Iowa, can come together and create a worldwide media revolution with their Did You Know series. Okay, so that's the end of my observations. Now I want to turn to my questions. So my questions begin with this one. What about the law? Well, unfortunately, or fortunately, whichever, the law is a bit different. In fact, there's a critical component of the law, and that's copyright. Our law is not public. For example, this system, PACER, the Public Access to Court Electronic Records, created by the judicial system across the United States, it is not public in nature. In fact, here's a little interesting story that happened because this system is not public. The White House, the executive branch of government, last year paid money to access their own laws. And not a little money. $50 million. The executive branch paid the judicial branch to access our own laws. But that is just pennies. All of this is a visual representation of the amount of money that we spend every single year on accessing our own information. Each one of those is a $100 bill sitting on pallets full of millions of $100 bills, adding up to $10 billion. That's the amount that we pay annually to access our own law. How much do you pay? Right? We all do it. How much are you paying to access our own law? So we know now that Westlaw and Lexis are not equal to YouTube and Wikipedia in those kinds of Web 2.0 areas. Even though they've done a lot of great stuff online, it's not the same. But still, I want to leave you with something is different. Here's an example, bulk.resource.org. It's a database and it contains millions and millions of legal records, including cases that are updated daily. Okay? So data is constantly pouring into this thing, bulk.resource.org. It's a horrid site. I hope you don't go there. I'm going to tell you not to go there, although now you probably do want to go there. It's almost impossible to find anything that you're looking for, but that's not important. What's important is that all of this data is contained in a site that's searchable. Because who does a really, really good job at searching enormous piles of data? Well, Google does. And last year, in the fall of 2009, I think in December, Google jumped into the legal world. So now on Google Scholar, you can search legal opinions and some journals, although journals are certainly restricted by an additional layer of copyright. But nevertheless, it's a start. So now, with Google Scholar, you can search millions of journals, millions of cases, and a bunch of journals. So, what's happening here? Where are we at in this transition? Right? That's a tough question. So, specifically, I wanted to know, what about our resources, the ones in education law? So, like any good researcher, we just asked. So here's a study that I did, and I want to report. I did this study with Kevin Brady, who's a professor at North Carolina State University. So we wanted to know to what extent is the internet changing educational law research, what aspects of the internet are being primarily used, and how and why are people in the educational law field utilizing free resources in educational law. So a little bit about our data and methods. It was an online survey. We coordinated with professional organizations to have it filled out. We got 100 respondents. I will say that the respondents are too heavily weighted in the professor world, but we had a little bit of trouble getting on board with NSBA, getting out to their school attorneys. Anyway, as I present the data, keep that in mind. So the basic question of, you accomplish the largest percentage of your professional education law research needs through which of the following media? Well, you can see that legal textbooks and hornbooks came down the highest, and you'll see later that's because we had too many professors in this sample. But case law reviews and Google were pretty close together here. So we found that to be quite interesting. When we started asking how much of that research is being conducted using the internet, both for-profit and both for-profit and for free, you can see that around 60 to 90%, depending on the mean, median, or mode. We thought that it might be distributed more heavily to new entrants into the education law field. Theoretically, your younger folks, your younger attorneys, your younger administrators and professors. But we didn't find that to be the case. You can see with that graph there that there's pretty equal distribution of internet usage, the internet usage being blue, across the experience spectrum. So then we asked, what's your first resource? And here you can see the differences between attorneys, professors, and others. Attorneys went first to cases. Professors went first to textbooks. So that's quite a bit of difference, and you can see why earlier hornbooks was too heavily represented. But the other category, which is all administrators for the most part, you can see they start their searches with Google or another internet source. So you can see that the internet's already playing, the free internet, it's already playing a large role with our administrators. And when we look at some of our other sources, free resources and fee resources, we can see that there's sort of equal usage between free and fee-based, but that people responded that they liked their free sites better, even though the quality may be lower. They were more satisfied with those sites because they were getting it for free. That's our speculation. So then we asked about all the different types, and you can see that they're pretty satisfied with lots of different types, but the satisfaction did correspond to what we thought. U.S. Supreme Court cases, which are available online in lots of different places, there was heavy satisfaction with, and then journals where there's the lowest percentage of online accessibility for free. You can see that there's the lowest levels of satisfaction. So that seems somewhat appropriate. We did find that people, at least a quarter of them, would use blogs. Remember, this was a year or two ago. And also, there's strong indication that folks would use a peer-reviewed online journal if it was free. Although our professors were the ones that had the biggest problem with that. And then finally, as a last kind of question, we asked, has the internet significantly changed how I conduct my educational research? And you can see that a very large percentage, around 75%, over 75%, agreed or strongly agreed that the internet has changed how we do our educational law research. So these were some of our broad findings. A lot of it's being conducted online using online tools. Some folks have no access to fee-based legal research tools. We would use an online journal. Anyway, you can read the rest. So that's the end of my questions. Now let me move on to my examples. I want to break up my examples a little bit into primary, secondary, and new media sources. So first on primary sources, here's the superstar now, Google Scholar. Uh, Google Scholar's legal opinions and journals are so impressive that they've actually put a couple of other companies out of business already. So Altlaw and Precedent were two other free-based legal research tools that have gone under since Google came on board. The government provides a lot of access here at the federal level: GPO access, Thomas, USA.gov, Data.gov. All of these, I think, are interesting. They're somewhat disjointed, however, and so that last one, Data.gov, is interesting because I want you to keep in mind, it's not going to happen for sure yet, but there's a new push to create a site called law.gov, which would try to aggregate all of the law from the various branches of government into one location and dump all that data, where data.gov is just an enormous data dump that other sites like Google search, and so law.gov would probably be a similar data dump, but nevertheless look for that potentially coming down the road pretty soon. Universities, of course, do their best to get information out there. Cornell's Law School has done a great job over time with their Legal Information Institute, which is probably my primary statutory resource for federal law. A whole effort, university and otherwise based effort across the world has sprung up with this free access to law movement, and you can see all the sites across the world where others are trying to do this. Another university-based one out of Northwestern is a site called Oyez, which I love. Oyez is fine for finding Supreme Court cases, but what it's really stupendous at is having the audio of the oral arguments, and when a decision is read, also the decision being read from the bench. So this is fantastic. An example of how I use this in my courses, I have my students listen to Justice Kennedy's concurrence in the Seattle and Louisville school desegregation cases. Because it all turned on Justice Kennedy's concurrence, I really wanted them to hear him explain why he thought that there can be, that diversity may be a compelling interest, but that narrow tailoring was so difficult. So that's sort of how I use Oyez. Corporations are starting to get on board in some ways. They're trying to go out with a freemium model where they put some information out for free, and if you want anything deeper than that initial level of information, you have to pay. So these are some examples: FimeLaw, LexisOne, and the Public Library of Law. Kentucky, of course, is trying too. The Kentucky legislature puts out this page, which has the statutes and regulations, our constitution, bills. So this is a nice site. Searching here could be improved substantially. Frequently the search results I get back are not the ones that I was looking for, and certainly had I been using Google, the search I think would have been more effective. But nevertheless, Kentucky is trying to get their information out there for free. One thing you'll notice that we're not doing for free, though, on this page is any of our case law. Other folks around the state policy entities, such as KSBA, our host here today, are putting out other legal components, such as school policies. So KSBA has been very instrumental in helping schools get their school policies online. So there's Jessamine counties, but lots of other counties around the state look the same in that kind of policy database. So let's move on now to secondary sources and talk a little bit about some of those. Law journals, surprisingly, are beginning to come online. USC Law is sort of tracking this change and keeps up with which new law reviews have switched to free online editions of their journals. So this is a great place to go and see if you can find the free ones. If you have students, or if you're looking for one and you don't have access to it on Lexis or whatever, this might be a good spot for you. Treatises are starting to come online, though they look differently. Here, Missouri put together a school law treatise that just happens to be online, and you move through this online treatise using an index which you see here on the screen. So based on topical issues, you can go down and find what Missouri has written on each of these different areas of educational law. There's lots of white papers. This is a company I used to work for, Education Commission of the States. Their education issues, they put those out all the time, and is a great starting place when you need 50 state information, when you want to know what the other 50 states are doing. This is a great location for that. The dictionaries are up there. So now let's move to new media. We're going to talk about some sites, some blogs, some wikis, and some other things. All right, first off with sites. The best site that's going right now is Legal Clips. Okay, and this is their new web page where they're now using a blogging kind of format to get their legal clips up, which were previously just coming through your email. Anyway, this is fantastic. Best site going for educational law information online. You obviously should probably subscribe through email, and if not, at least pick up the RSS feed from this Legal Clips. The great thing about this new website, though, is that it's organized by category, so you can go back and search by categories and see what's been happening in the past year on this category or that category. Super useful, great improvement, well done, NSBA Legal Clips. Blogs are a great source of information law. Obviously, I do my own, the Ed Jurist, so I want to promote that. But actually, Mark Walsh at Education Week does a fantastic job. And then there's a lot of very specific blogs, such as the Title IX blog, the Special Education Law blog, Connecticut Education Law blog. So, it gets much more specific past mine and Mark's. Nevertheless, there's great resources out there in the blogosphere. Also, some wikis are starting to develop. Lexis is trying to do an education law wiki, although at this point they're failing. But Wikipedia itself is quite useful. This is the New Jersey versus TLO case. When I don't know a case and somebody hits me with it, instead of going and trying to read the Westlaw headnote or something like that, I just go quickly to Wikipedia, and do a search there. And the information is always very accurate, so I feel quite confident. Obviously, before I would go into court or anything like that, I would have verified all of that information. But for a quick overview, hard to beat Wikipedia. Some new cool ones. Social networks are starting to pop up. So this is Jim Gerrels, who does a blog on special education law, but this is his special education law Facebook group, which has about 800 members in it. So 800 people around the world that are all interested in special education law are using Facebook to connect and share resources. So I love that we're tapping into those networks. Microblogs, specifically Twitter, are becoming a more popular space for education law information. So this is my Twitter feed, but Canyon's Dave, he's a lawyer who is a superintendent in Utah, happens to be up on the screen, but there's a lot of education law-oriented folks around the country that are putting information out on Twitter, usually with a link. You can see all the links in there, so you can then follow and read the story or read whatever else. But it brings all the information to you, which is like a new way of interacting with the internet. Instead of you trying to go out and find the information like at a Legal Clips, Twitter brings all that information to you on a daily basis, on a pretty much up to the second basis. When something happens in the world, it's on Twitter within seconds. Some new forms also are podcasts. So this is a podcast that I subscribe to called This Week in Law. It's a little bit boring, and this space is not fully developed yet, but look for a lot more development in this space in the pretty near future, as a lot of our devices are becoming mobile. So that's something you may want to check out. And also, there's new iPhone and iPad apps that are being developed, and here's one that I would recommend, Lawbox. For relatively cheap prices, you can get a lot of very nice statutory and regulatory components on your iPhone or iPad using this app. So it's something quite nice. Westlaw and Lexis don't have iPhone or iPad apps yet, but I'm sure they're working to develop them. So I could go on with more and more resources for a lot more time, but I'll spare you. Um, the point is that there are tons of resources out there that you can explore and find. When you explore and find nowadays, you should be sharing those resources with others. That's what I want to leave you with. So that's the end of my examples, just for time's sake. Let me now wrap up and move us into discussion. Let me pose a few questions. First, if we can trust our colleagues when writing in a journal, why can't we trust them when writing on a blog? Secondly, if we can change the way we buy things and share things and even how we fall in love, why not how we share the rules? And lastly, and most importantly in my mind, if one person can make an enormous difference, what's our responsibility to share? Thank you.